Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1973. We're going to be taking a look at Shannon and he's going to be performing Runaway. Let's get Del up on screen and see how he gets on.
As I walk along, I wonder what went wrong with our love. Love that was so strong. And as I still walk on, I think of things we've done together while our hearts were young. I'm a walk in the rain, tears are falling and I feel the pain. Wishing you were here by me to end this misery, and I wonder, I wonder why she ran away, and I wonder where you're gonna stay, yeah, my little runaway, run, 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 run away. I'm a walk in the rain, tears are falling and I feel the pain. Wishing you were here by me to end this misery, and I wonder, I wonder why she ran away, and I wonder where you're gonna stay, yeah, my little runaway. Run, 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 run away. 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 Run, 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 run away.
And there we have it. So this is one of those songs that everybody knows, even if they don't know that they know it, or they know that it's a Del Shannon song, released in 1961 originally, and it's only a couple of minutes in length, just over. And in the studio, when it was first recorded, it would have been longer than that because it was recorded at a much slower tempo, but then it was sped up in the studio before it was released. So the released version is really up-tempo. As we can see, there's an energy about it, but it wasn't actually recorded that way. I think it went up almost a tone in terms of the pitch, because once you start to speed up tape, it obviously increases in pitch. So it was almost 2 notes higher, but then once it was out there, they perform it at that same speed all the time. And it's such a unique song in so many ways, but most notably the control of falsetto that Del has with his vocals, but also the keyboard solo or the synthesizer solo. Let me just throw in there as well about Max Crook and his Musitron that he designed himself, that he's playing in this video, in this performance, because it was something totally revolutionary. Obviously, watching it now, we know what synthesizers sound like because of the groundwork put in by Max initially. But having that little keyboard there for the time was a totally different sound and would take the song to a totally different place and set it apart from other songs around at the time just because of having this lead instrument. Let me just bring it back to Del's control of his falsetto that I mentioned earlier in the choruses, because you can tell by the way that he's expressing the wah in that chorus that there's a lot of air in that sound, but he gets such a clean note from his falsetto, and it's something that generally when guys are singing in their falsetto range, there's a lot of air in the sound and you can hear the air, But Del is using a lot of air, but he's getting such a clean sound. This is why it was so unique, because other people trying to get the same sound wouldn't necessarily be able to get the clarity of tone that Del does. In this performance, and every live performance that you'll see, he nails it every time. It's just a go-to sound that he can just get his vocal cords to that place. He's so good at controlling that falsetto register in the chorus. He never allows it to flip down into chest voice, and you can hear the control on the lowest note of his falsetto, then the complete break off into chest voice, and there's no way of blending those two registers. It just is impossible. Guys that have got great control can yodel, and that's all it is. Yodeling, changing from chest voice and flipping up into a falsetto sound, but nailing the notes up at the top. And this is something that Del had total control over. So we've got an interesting journey here throughout, because we're starting in that minor key with the verse, and then we're going into the pre-chorus, which then changes to major. So it starts to become a little bit more uplifting, and then we get into the chorus, which again is major, but we have this standalone vocal that's being taken up an octave, and that is always going to have an emotional impact on you, even just as a standalone line, that it is a point of interest on that journey throughout the song that we visit in the chorus. And then when we come to this key solo as well, as I mentioned, it was a new sound for the time. And again, going back to the minor key. So it's making an interesting journey the whole time. We've just had that point of interest in the chorus, and now we've got a totally new point of interest, but dynamically, we're pretty much all in for the full 2 minutes. And the thing that makes the chorus interesting as well is the total change in accents and rhythm that we get from the drums during that chorus. And it's now emphasizing two and of the bar. And we've got the foot pedal actually going all the way through, just a consistent, solid foot pedal throughout the chorus. But it is the snare in the chorus that really does change it up, because it's a totally different feel. When we've got our standard rhythm, the snare's going to be coming in on 2 and 4. So we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Whereas the chorus, we're going 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, and. It's that 2 and that's giving it a totally different feel to the rest of the song. Once you start adding these things together with that unique vocal that Del had the ability to supply, and also the new keys, synthesizer sound that I've already mentioned, also a horn section in there throughout the song. There are so many interesting elements going on here within such a short song that you'd have to rewind it back to the beginning and listen to it all over again. This song was one of those rare first-time hits, because Del had just signed with Big Top Records in 1961, and the first recording session actually wasn't going very well, and it was Ollie McLaughlin who suggested to do that song that they had called Little Runaway, and they then shortened the name to Runaway when it was released. But Ollie also suggested to have the Musitron as a lead instrument, so that's exactly what they did in the studio. And like I said, once they'd recorded it, it was then sped up before release, and therefore when they performed it live, they always had the same tempo that was sped up. But interestingly, the key returned back to where it was originally recorded, but just with that increased tempo. So now when you listen to a performance like this and the original that was released as a record, it's almost lost the body of Del's vocal because of that speeding up that happened with the tape before release. And when you listen to it live, there's so much more body in Del's vocal tone. It's just something that tends to happen when you do speed something up. It starts to get thinner and thinner in terms of the sound that you're listening to. And if you keep on speeding stuff up over and over and over and keep going and going and going, it'll then eventually sound like a chipmunk. And everybody knows that sound. And that is effectively what's happened, obviously to a lesser extent, but because it's been increased by at least a semitone, if not a tone, on that final record to where they initially initially recorded it, it means that you lose that body of Del's voice, but the impact of going up an octave in the chorus in falsetto is even more dramatic because it's going to a higher point than it actually did in the recording studio. Del didn't get his break early on. He was about 27 when Runaway was released as his debut, and he had been in the army in the mid-50s, and while he was stationed over in Germany, he actually joined a band over there. And then when he returned back to the USA, he was a carpet salesman and a truck driver, and in 1958 he joined Moonlight Ramblers. And the singer for that band was Ben DeMott, but Ben was fired for drunkenness, and Del just stood up and became the vocalist. This is when Max got involved as well with his Musitron, and Max had recorded some demos and sent them to Ollie McLaughlin, who I mentioned earlier, and through Ollie, they eventually did manage to sign a deal with Big Top Records. So this song was a massive hit all over the place. It got to number 1 in the UK, number 1 in the USA, and he followed it up with Hats Off to Larry, which got to number 5 in the charts, another big hit. The third single was called So Long Baby, and then also in 1962 he recorded Little Town Flirt, and that did get to number 12 in 1963. He managed to maintain his success in the early 60s and mid-60s in the UK, but he started to become less popular in the USA at this time. And an interesting fact is that Del did a cover of From Me to You by the Beatles, and that was released in the US charts before the actual original got there by the Beatles. So it was a rare thing to have a cover of another song that was in the charts before the original was even in there. In 1963, due to the relationship between Del, his management, and the record label breaking down, he set up his own record label. He released Sue's Gotta Be Mine, and that got to number 71 in the US charts and number 21 here in the UK. He then released That's the Way Love Is, and unfortunately that didn't chart. In 1964 is when he signed with Amy Records, and therefore from then on he didn't release any more on his own label. He had an immediate return to the charts with Handyman, Do You Wanna Dance, Keep Searching, Stranger in the Town, and this was the same year that he recorded a demo for Bob Seger, and also 1964 is when he did his tribute album for Hank Williams, and that was called Del Shannon Sings Hank Williams. In 1965 he opened for Ike and Tina Turner, and that was the same year that he wrote I Go to Pieces for Peter and Gordon, and in 1966 is when he signed to Liberty Records, and that was the same year that he discovered Johnny Carver, and he worked on everything in the production side of things, the writing, the arrangement for Johnny, and towards the end of the 60s is when Del started to get more heavily involved with the production side of things. In 1967 he recorded the album Home and Away, but that was shelved by the record label. The songs from that album weren't released until 24 years later in the USA, and then over here in the UK we had to wait 39 years for that album. But the Further Adventures of Charles Westover was released in 1967, and that, by the way, is Del's real name. In 1972 is when he signed with United Artists and released Live in England. In 1975 he signed with Island Records, but throughout the 70s, unfortunately, his career suffered somewhat due to his alcoholism and the things that he was going through at that time. In 1982 is when he recorded and released Drop Down and Get Me, and this was produced by Tom Petty, and he was backed by the Heartbreakers on that album. It did take a couple of years for that to be released because the album was recorded with RSO Records, who unfortunately folded. So fortunately, they did manage to release it through other means at a later date. In the 1980s, he re-recorded this track for a TV show called Crime Story. In the late 80s, he did some recording with Jeff Lynne, and there was a rumour around at the time that he was going to replace Roy Orbison in the Travelling Wilburys because of Roy's sad death. But unfortunately, that never materialised because there is a sad end to this story. Del had suffered with depression for a long time and ended up taking his life in February of 1990. 1990, and the Travelling Wilburys did record a version of Runaway in Del's honour. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1999 and also into the Michigan Rock and Roll Legends Hall of Fame, and that was in 2005. But it's great to have a look back at Del with this live performance, obviously a little bit later than the release because this was 12 years afterwards, but it still showed the quality of Del's vocals, his falsetto ability, but also the musitron that we have here in this performance, the same one used on the recording played by Max. Such an interesting composition, a short composition, but so many places that we visit on this journey. Thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one.